The crowd had gathered at the Sanctuary of the Fallen in Heritage Memorial Grounds. The day was bright, sunlight bouncing off the white stone, and even the air seemed to slow down every breath. Families, veterans, and tourists stood together in a silence that carried the weight of memory. Among them was the Whitfield family. The father scrolled through emails on his phone, the mother adjusted her designer sunglasses without really looking around, and their 13-year-old son Brandon dragged his sneakers across the pavement, holding his phone as if it was the only reason he existed here. He wasn't here for remembrance. For Brandon, this was nothing more than a chance to make a TikTok clip. He flipped between camera modes, tilted his head for the right angle, pulled exaggerated faces. The crowd fell even quieter when the guard came into view. Marcus Ellison, tall and commanding in his perfectly pressed uniform, stepped with precision honed through years of discipline. His dark skin, his rigid posture, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses gave him a presence that could silence even the most restless. To many, he was a living symbol of sacrifice. To Brandon, he was just content. The boy smirked into his phone, whispering, "A robot in costume." No one else heard it, but the words revealed the detachment he'd absorbed at home. His parents weren't paying attention. His father was still lost in messages, his mother scrolling through Instagram stories as if nothing around her mattered. Brandon wanted a bigger reaction. He picked up a half-empty plastic bottle of soda. To him, it wasn't disrespect. It was just material for views. He tossed it with a flick of his wrist, and it landed with a sharp slap against the ground. Sticky liquid sprayed across Marcus's polished boots. The gasp from the crowd cut through the warm air like glass breaking. Veterans in the front row clenched their jaws. A mother pulled her child closer, shielding them from the sight. An older man in a cap tightened his lips as though holding back the words he wanted to shout. Silence dropped like a curtain, heavier than any sound. Marcus didn't move. His face remained carved in stone, but deep inside, the insult echoed. His father's voice lived inside him even now. The uniform is not clothing, it's a promise. And in that instant, the promise felt mocked. Brandon glanced around, saw the shocked faces, and grinned wider. In his head, this was victory, the kind of clip that could go viral. He imagined the comments rolling in, the likes stacking up. His parents still hadn't noticed. His mother was distracted by a new notification, his father taking a call. The crowd remained frozen. For them, this wasn't a prank. It was a violation. For Marcus, it was a test of endurance. His boots were stained, but his dignity stood unbroken. If moments like this moved you, hit the like button and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. The bottle lay on the ground, its contents dripping into the cracks of the pavement. But Brandon wasn't finished. He lifted his phone again, zooming in on the guard's boots. "Look at that," he muttered into the camera, his grin spreading across his face. The robot got dirty. His voice carried farther than he realized, and heads in the crowd turned sharply in his direction. Marcus Ellison didn't flinch. His heel struck the ground with the same deliberate rhythm as before. 21 measured steps, a sharp turn, 21 steps back. His posture was flawless, his silence unbroken. But behind the sunglasses, his eyes burned. Years of discipline, years of training had taught him to stand unshaken through insults, through taunts, through distraction. Yet what burned inside him now wasn't anger for himself. It was for the memory he guarded. The veterans noticed first. A man in a worn army jacket whispered to the woman beside him, shaking his head. Another veteran, leaning on a cane, let out a bitter chuckle, not from humor, but disbelief. Their eyes, hardened by time and service, fell on Brandon with a weight he couldn't even recognize. For them, it wasn't a boy acting out. It was the reflection of a generation raised without boundaries. But Brandon only grew bolder. He waved his phone toward Marcus again. "You can't even talk, can you? Just a statue. Just a machine." His laughter echoed unnaturally in the stillness. A mother in the crowd covered her child's ears. A group of teenagers shook their heads, muttering under their breath. One man, his chest decorated with medals from another era, clenched his fists. He didn't speak, but the look on his face spoke louder than words. This isn't just disrespect, it's shame. And through it all, Brandon's parents remained detached. His father had finally ended his call, but returned to scrolling, as though the ceremony was background noise. His mother posted a selfie with the memorial faintly visible behind her shoulder, captioned with a row of heart emojis. Neither looked up to notice their son's taunts. Neither stopped him. It was this silence, not the boy's words, not the bottle, that struck hardest for the crowd. Parents had always been the first teachers of respect. Here they were absent, and the absence screamed louder than any insult. Marcus kept his composure, each step still exact, but inside his chest, memory collided with duty. His brother's name, etched forever in his heart, felt like it had been dragged through the dirt with that bottle. The crowd's disapproval grew heavier. Murmurs rippled, words like shameful, parents' fault, and disgrace weaving through the air. Brandon, lost in his own performance, didn't hear them. Or perhaps he chose not to. For him, it was still a game. For everyone else, it was the beginning of something darker. The murmurs from the crowd grew heavier, but Brandon only smirked, energized by the tension. For him, silence was an invitation to push further. He slid his phone into selfie mode, turned toward the crowd, and whispered with a mischievous grin, "Watch this." He stepped closer to the rope barrier. Signs clearly warned visitors not to cross, but Brandon barely glanced at them. His sneakers scraped against the pavement as he leaned over the rope, holding his phone high to frame Marcus Ellison in the background. He puckered his lips in mock seriousness. "Me and the robot soldier," he muttered, grinning, "going viral for sure." The veterans bristled. One man muttered, "Don't you dare." A woman wearing a Marine Corps pin shook her head, whispering to the child at her side, "This is exactly what respect looks like when it's never taught." Still, Brandon didn't stop. The rope wasn't enough for him. He swung a leg over and crossed onto the forbidden ground. The crowd gasped in unison. The sacred boundary had been broken. A mother covered her child's eyes. Phones came up, recording the scene as though no one could quite believe what they were witnessing. Marcus's heart pounded, though his face remained unreadable. Protocol screamed at him to stay still, to hold formation, to ignore the distraction. But the image of his brother's grave flashed through his mind. The tomb was more than stone. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was sacred. And now it was being mocked by a child too blind to see the weight of his actions. Brandon stood beside him now, holding the phone high. "Selfie with the robot," he said, laughing. The glow of the screen reflected on his face as he leaned closer, stretching the moment. And then, without warning, Marcus moved. It was one swift, precise motion, faster than anyone expected. His hand shot forward, striking the phone from Brandon's grip. The device hit the ground with a sharp crack. The screen splintered, shards scattering like glass under sunlight. The sound rang out louder than any voice, sharper than any gasp. The boy froze. His eyes widened, his mouth hung open, shock replacing his smugness. The crowd erupted. Some gasped in disbelief. Others let out quiet cheers, as though justice had been served. One veteran clapped once, firm and deliberate, breaking the silence. Marcus returned to position. His posture was perfect, his eyes hidden, his step steady. But the air had changed. The crowd wasn't just watching a ceremony anymore. They were witnessing a confrontation between arrogance and honor. For the first time, Brandon felt small. His performance had collapsed into fragments of glass. The phone was broken. But the weight of what had just happened, that was only beginning to sink in. The shatter of the phone still echoed when the authority arrived. Officer Regina Miles, a woman known for her calm precision, pushed through the stunned crowd. Her uniform carried weight, but it was the look in her eyes, sharp, steady, unwavering, that silenced the whispers. She positioned herself between Marcus Ellison and the boy, her presence a wall of order. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice even but cutting through the air like steel. Before Brandon could answer, his father stormed forward. His designer watch caught the light as he jabbed a finger toward Marcus. "That soldier just assaulted my son," he barked. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Do you have any idea who I am?" The crowd bristled. A veteran muttered, "We know exactly who you are." The problem. Brandon's mother rushed in next, clutching her son's shoulders as if shielding him from the consequences of his own actions. "He's just a child," she insisted, her tone dripping with indignation. "You can't treat him like a criminal. He didn't mean any harm." Officer Miles didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed on Brandon. "Your son crossed a restricted barrier," she said firmly. "He defiled a sacred space and disrespected a guard on duty. That isn't harmless. That's trespassing. That's assault." Gasps rippled through the crowd. For the first time, the boy's parents faltered, and then came Colonel Angela Brooks. Her arrival drew a hush so complete that even the cicadas seemed to fall silent. Silver-haired, her uniform crisp, she carried herself with the authority of someone who had given decades to her country. She stepped past Officer Miles, her voice steady, each word heavy with history. "This memorial," she said, gesturing toward the stones, "isn't a backdrop for your vacation. It isn't a stage for a child's joke or a parent's ignorance. It is the resting place of men and women who gave everything, their lives, their futures, their families, for the freedoms you take for granted." Her eyes locked on the parents. "You allowed this? You raised him without boundaries, without discipline, without respect. And today, the world saw it." The father's face reddened. "We can handle this quietly," he stammered. "A donation, a settlement, whatever you need." But Brooks shook her head. "This isn't about money. You can't buy back honor. You can't purchase respect." Her words rang out, not just for them, but for every ear in the crowd. Murmurs of agreement swelled. Veterans nodded. Parents pulled their children closer, as though reminding them silently. This is how you carry respect. This is how you fail it. Brandon, silent now, stared at the broken fragments of his phone. For the first time, he realized his parents couldn't shield him from what was coming next. The security office was cool and quiet, its walls lined with framed photographs of past ceremonies, solemn faces frozen in black and white. Brandon sat hunched in a chair, his sneakers tapping nervously against the floor. His phone, the centerpiece of his defiance, was gone, shattered beyond repair. But that wasn't what weighed on him now. It was the silence. Heavy, unyielding silence. Across from him sat Dr. Naomi Sinclair, a psychologist whose steady eyes carried the patience of someone who had spent her life listening to excuses. She leaned forward, pen poised over a notepad, her voice calm but unwavering. "Brandon, I want you to tell me why you did it," she said. The boy shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I don't know. I was bored. It was just a joke." Naomi's pen didn't move. She tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the room. "A joke? Throwing a bottle at a soldier standing guard? Crossing a barrier that honors the fallen? Mocking a man who carries the weight of thousands on his shoulders? That's not a joke. That's disrespect." Brandon shifted uncomfortably. He muttered. He didn't even react. "It's not like I hurt him." Her eyes narrowed. "That's the discipline of a soldier. He's trained to stay still, even under attack. Do you know why? Because what he guards is sacred. That silence you thought was funny? It's a silence earned by blood." His shoulders slumped. For the first time, shame began to creep into his voice. I didn't think about it like that." Naomi leaned closer. "And that's the problem. You don't think about anyone but yourself. Every video, every prank, every smirk. It's about attention. But attention without respect is nothing. It's empty. Behind him, his parents sat in silence, their usual confidence gone. Naomi's gaze shifted to them. And this isn't just his failure, it's yours. Children don't grow entitled on their own. They learn it from what they see, from what's ignored, from what's excused. The father opened his mouth to protest, but the words died in his throat. The mother clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles white. Naomi turned back to Brandon. This isn't about punishment. It's about responsibility. You mocked a guard who lost his brother in war. You mocked every family who has ever stood where you stand now. Do you understand the weight of that? Brandon's throat tightened. He nodded, though no words came. The shame was no longer abstract. It pressed down on him like the stillness outside, a weight too real to escape. The next morning, Brandon's punishment began. No lawyers, no shortcuts, no donations to smooth things over. Colonel Brooks had made it clear. The boy would spend 4 weeks serving the very ground he had disrespected, and his parents, for once, couldn't buy his way out. At sunrise, Brandon traded his expensive sneakers and branded hoodie for a plain work shirt, gloves, and scuffed boots too big for his feet. The luxury he was used to was gone. The Heritage Memorial grounds stretched out before him, row upon row of white stones gleaming under the morning light. Every marker represented a name, a sacrifice, a family. And now, his job was to care for them. The first week was grueling. He raked leaves along endless paths, pulled stubborn weeds that clung to the earth, and scrubbed stains from headstones until his arms ached. Sweat stung his eyes, and blisters formed on his palms. Each evening, he collapsed into bed, too tired to complain. Yet the veterans who worked beside him never slowed, never grumbled. Men missing limbs, women with faces marked by scars and lines of hardship. They worked with pride, because this labor wasn't a chore, it was an honor. By the second week, Brandon's protests faded into silence. Instead, he listened. One groundskeeper, a Marine veteran, told him about carrying friends off the battlefield. Another, a quiet Army medic, explained how every name etched into stone was someone's child, someone's sibling. Brandon had never thought about death that way, as more than numbers in a history book, as people who once laughed and dreamed. The turning point came in week 3. He was introduced to Helen Ward, a 90-year-old nurse who had served during the Korean War. Her hands trembled as she held his, but her voice was steady. "I was younger than you when I watched boys die in my arms," she said. "Some never even made it to the hospital tent. They never got to grow up, to live the lives you take for granted." Her words pierced him deeper than any lecture. He felt a sting in his chest, the same sting that had followed him since the day his phone shattered. But now it wasn't anger. It was humility. For the first time, he wanted to understand, not escape. By the 4th week, Brandon's steps slowed as he walked the grounds. He no longer saw endless rows of stone, but individual lives. Every polished marker carried a story. Every flag placed by a grave was a reminder that freedom came with a price. And while Brandon labored, his parents faced their own reckoning. Ordered to attend classes on parenting and respect, they sat in rooms where experts stripped away excuses. For the first time, they had to admit aloud that neglect was not love, that indifference was not guidance, and that wealth could never substitute for values. For all 3 Whitfields, the correction had begun. 4 weeks passed, and the punishment neared its end. On a cloudless morning, Brandon found himself standing once more among the crowd at the sanctuary of the fallen. The same place where his arrogance had stained the silence was now transformed in his eyes. The rhythm of boots against stone was no longer background noise. It was a heartbeat, a steady, unwavering heartbeat of sacrifice. Marcus Ellison reappeared in full uniform, his posture precise, his gaze fixed. To the crowd, he was the same sentinel as before, unshaken and flawless. But to Brandon, every step carried a weight he finally understood. He thought of Helen Ward's trembling voice, of veterans' scars, of rows upon rows of names. Each detail pressed into him with an ache he could not ignore. When the ceremony ended, Brandon was guided into a private room, its walls adorned with photographs of fallen soldiers and handwritten letters from their families. Marcus entered quietly, now without his cap, his presence commanding yet deeply human. For the first time, the boy who once mocked him faced him without defiance. Brandon's voice cracked but didn't falter. He admitted he had been selfish, chasing a video clip without realizing the insult he dealt not just to Marcus, but to every soul honored in that place. He confessed that he had treated the sacred as disposable, blinded by a hunger for approval that didn't matter. Marcus listened without interruption. His expression was stern, but in his eyes lived something more. Grief, endurance, the unspoken memory of his brother Darius, who never came home. Finally, Marcus spoke. He explained that the tomb wasn't just a post, but a promise to never let sacrifice be forgotten. When Brandon threw that bottle, it wasn't just water that spilled, it was dignity. The boy's throat tightened. Tears blurred his vision, but he held Marcus's gaze. I understand now. I can't change what I did, but I don't want to forget it either. Marcus extended his hand. Their handshake was firm, unflinching, more than forgiveness. It was a transfer of responsibility, the demand that Brandon carry forward what he had learned. Outside, the crowd saw them emerge together. No words were spoken, but in the shared silence, there was a sense of healing, a sense that even arrogance could be reshaped into respect. And as I think about this story, I find myself asking the same questions I want you to consider. Who bore the greater fault? The boy blinded by entitlement, or the parents who failed to guide him? Was Marcus right to break protocol, or did he risk too much for the sake of a lesson? To me, this tale is about more than discipline. It's about the fragile chain of respect that links generations, and how quickly it can unravel when left untended. But I'd like to hear from you. What do you think? Who was right? Who was wrong? And what should have been done differently? Let me know in the comments. And remember, this story is fictional. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. If this story moved you, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the other stories waiting for you here. Stories of honor, sacrifice, and lessons that can change more than just one life.
Don't you bow for the guess and vision? Don't you pass for that hard moment love? Don't you bow for the guess?